Prendió una patada.
Dios.
Terremoto. Terremoto que todavía dura, ¿eh? Terremoto que todavía dura. Todavía dura. No para el terremoto, ¿eh? Todavía dura, ¿eh? ¿Está bien? Mira lo de arriba, cómo está la pared.
Dios, ya ves, se ve medio...
At the close of the 15th century, Fernando II, King of Aragon, and his wife, Isabel, Queen of Castile and Leon, waged a decades-long war to subdue the final Muslim portion of Spain, the Emirate of Granada. For Queen Isabel, this was a deeply meaningful crusade. Her ancestor, Saint Fernando, King of Castile and Leon, had conducted a grand campaign to subdue Córdoba and Sevilla. Now, Isabel saw herself as completing his work, bringing the territory of Granada for the first time in 8 centuries under Christian rule. The king and queen began their crusade in 1482. The Emirate of Granada, ruled by the Nasrid dynasty, was small but well situated in the mountainous southeast. To conquer Granada's well-defended cities would be a grueling and perilous task. From Rome, the Pope offered his support, declaring the campaign a crusade with spiritual merit. Within Granada itself, unity did not always prevail. Granada's ruler, the Emir Boabdil, had to contend with rebellious factions and even his own family members. However, the threat from Aragon and Castile did often forge a unity of purpose among Granada's Muslims, even when Boabdil's leadership proved less than decisive. Boabdil's greatest rival would be his own uncle, El Zagal, a courageous and competent military commander who inspired loyalty and bravery among the Muslim fighting men. By the late 1480s, Fernando and Isabel had made much progress, but El Zagal remained their greatest opponent in the crusade. While Boabdil ruled from Granada, El Zagal held the powerful coastal fortress of Almería, one of the key strongholds still in Muslim hands. In 1488, Fernando and Isabel targeted the port city of Almeria, the power base of their greatest opponent, El Zagal. Although Fernando's army was able to capture the fortress of Vera, the city of Almeria itself, bolstered by El Zagal's generalship, successfully resisted his assault, and the year ended with no major conquest. Meanwhile, Fernando and Isabel were coming to be recognized all across Europe. The Italian scholar Peter Martyr praised their rule and the prosperity and peace they'd brought to their people. The highest ranks of European nobility sought Spanish marriage alliances with both the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of England, asking that daughters of Isabel and Fernando be given to their heirs in marriage. In 1489, Fernando and Isabel moved their court to the mountain city of Jaén, just north of Granada, from whence they launched another army to continue hammering at El Zagal's power base around Almeria. Meanwhile, the bulk of the summer was spent advancing on the Moorish fortress of Baza, one of El Zagal's important strongholds. Baza was situated in a great forest, which itself was filled with hidden fortifications. The armies of Castile and Aragon essentially had to clear the bulk of the forest to safely invest the city, and this wasn't completed until the fall. After months more of besiegement, Baza finally surrendered on December 4. With Baza fallen, El Zagal was essentially penned into the coastal city of Almeria. The stern old Moorish warrior had put all of his energy into defending Baza, and he recognized when he was beaten. He offered to surrender Almeria. On December 23, 1489, the tall Moorish chieftain, clad all in black, received Fernando in the city, where he hailed him as king conqueror and relinquished control over Almeria. As the city's chief mosque was converted to a cathedral, El Zagal boarded a ship and sailed for North Africa, where he ended his days. Throughout the Granada War, El Zagal had been Fernando and Isabel's greatest enemy and a courageous champion of the Muslims. Now his domain was conquered, and he himself was gone. There was nothing left to capture but Granada itself and her dependent fortresses. In January of 1490, Fernando and Isabel wrote to Boabdil, asking that he avoid further violence by surrendering Granada peacefully. The emir promised to do so, though he delayed actually handing over the city for months. In fact, Boabdil was not entirely free, for there were powerful factions within Granada urging him to resist, to live up to the spirit of Spain's early Arab conquerors by fighting to the end. Thus, Boabdil sallied from the last important Moorish city in 1490 and made a surprise assault on the castles of Alhandin and Salobreña. This was a stunning and bold move, though Fernando quickly repulsed Moorish troops from both castles and in retaliation heavily raided the Granadan countryside. That November, Fernando and Isabel escorted their eldest daughter, Princess Isabel, to Portugal to join her betrothed, Prince Afonso, who was so eager to meet his new bride that he broke the usual protocol, which held that a groom should not see his bride before the wedding. After their marriage, the couple was blissfully happy, but tragically, Afonso died in a horseback riding accident the following July. His young wife was devastated. That tragedy still lay in the future in April 1491, when King Fernando and Queen Isabel, along with their son Prince Juan, and an army some 80,000 strong, larger than any in the history of the Reconquista, set out for Granada, intent on reducing that city once and for all. As the army set in for the siege, a permanent military base, Santa Fe, was built near Granada, and the Duke of Cadiz defeated the Moors in a skirmish outside the city. However, in August, news arrived of the death of Princess Isabel's husband, Prince Afonso of Portugal, and the news devastated the royal family. That same month, Princess Isabel rejoined her family at Santa Fe, inconsolable in her sorrow, insisting that she would never remarry and would wear only coarse wool for the rest of her life. Queen Isabel, always close to her eldest daughter, was deeply distressed by her child's sorrow, but as ever maintained a serene bearing, never showing her sadness. She believed that it was absolutely necessary that she maintain poise for the good of the army's morale. Meanwhile, the Christian army pressed the siege relentlessly. By September, it was clear that Granada could not hold out much longer. Boabdil insisted to the Catholic monarchs that he intended to surrender, but that he needed time to accustom his people to the notion, for Granada was still filled with brave warriors who wanted to fight to the end. Boabdil asked the king and queen's representative, the knight Gonzalo of Cordoba, for 6 months until Granada was handed over. Isabella and Fernando absolutely refused to this. Finally, by November, Boabdil realized he could hold out no longer. With snow beginning to dust the Sierra Nevada, Boabdil agreed to surrender at the close of January 1492. The Muslims of Granada would be granted the right to practice their religion and live in the city unmolested, or they could vacate Granada for Africa. Once he'd come to terms with the Catholic king and queen, Boabdil found his position in Granada untenable. The enraged bellicose Moorish faction was plotting against his life. He wrote again to Isabel and Fernando, asking that he be allowed to abdicate on January 2nd, and that a contingent of Christian soldiers enter the city the night before to guard his own life. Fernando and Isabel agreed to this. At dawn, on January 2nd, the ancient gate of Granada, the last fortification in Iberia to hold out against Christian Castile and Aragon, was opened to a party of Spanish knights under the leadership of Gutierre de Cardenas, one of Isabel's most trusted commanders. Boabdil himself met them, placing in Gutierre's hand a document in which he formally renounced the city. Gutierre's first act was to have an altar raised in the middle of the Alhambra, where a priest in his company at once said Mass. Gutierre's men took possession of the Alhambra. 3 cannon shots were fired, announcing that Granada was in Christian hands. Now, the whole of the Christian army marched out of the camp at Santa Fe toward Granada. By 3 o'clock, they arrived, the king and the queen at their head. They and their nobles were garbed in their finest attire, jewels, silks, and brocade cloth, with the soldiers' armor and weapons brightly polished. Fernando rode ahead, Isabel behind him with their children. Boabdil stepped forward and passed the keys to the city into Fernando's hands, then submitted himself before the King of Aragon. Fernando passed the keys to Isabel, who handed them to Prince Juan, who passed them to the Count of Tendilla, the man selected by the King and Queen to govern Granada. Hernando de Talavera, Isabel's confessor, was named the city's bishop. The royal family now rode into Granada, followed by the whole of the army. They were greeted by a procession of Christians, former prisoners in Granada, now freed by Isabel and Fernando. Isabel received the Christians with great joy, then had them immediately led to Santa Fe, where they were fed and bestowed with gifts. Hernando de Talavera climbed to the Alhambra's high tower, where he raised a cross and cried out, Ave Cruz, spes unica, hail to the cross, our only hope. Next, the King and Queen's banner, along with the flag of Santiago, were raised over the citadel. Trumpets blasted, cannons fired, and the Christians spread throughout the city, singing joyously. Meanwhile, Granada's Moorish population watched in quiet silence and horror as their city, the last city of Al-Andalus, passed into Christian power. For both sides, it was a moment of profound emotion. Boabdil himself, along with his household and a melancholy party of Moors who would not remain in a Christian kingdom, departed Granada. When he reached the edge of the mountains, he turned to take a final look at the shining city of his forefathers, tears in his eyes. His mother, Zoraia, according to some sources, remarked, "You will weep like a woman, for what you could not defend like a man." So ended the career of the last Muslim ruler of Al-Andalus. He retired to Morocco, where he died many years later. The chroniclers tell us that the conquerors cried tears of joy. For Isabel, this was the paramount moment of her life, when she and Fernando brought a conclusion to the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle by the Christians of Spain to retake territory previously conquered by the Arabs from the Visigoths. In 722, Pelayo of Asturias had begun the struggle with his victory in the northernmost mountains of Covadonga. Now, in 1492, the story ended in the mountains of the southeast, with a cross being raised over the great Nasrid fortress of Granada, the Alhambra. Now that you've learned about the end of the Reconquista, check out our full-length documentary on the beginning, the Arab conquest of Spain, linked on your screen and in the description below.